Hello, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Serena Beck.
And I'm James Cleveland. Tonight we have a special episode for the 11th anniversary of the September 11th attacks.
Over the last 11 years since the attacks, the U.S. government has consistently sacrificed civil rights in the ever-consuming quest for safety. From the Patriot Act to the National Defense Authorization Act to the illegal wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. American citizens still live, rights are still eroding away.
Now we have a video overview of 9/11.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her. And her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack Special Forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about...
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
And...
They took the babies out of the incubators.
And...
Mobile production facilities.
And...
The rescue of
Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, MSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. Because ignorance is strength.
Next we have a video about jingoism since 9/11. Jingoism is extreme patriotism in the form of aggressive foreign policy practice. In practice, it is a country's advocation of the use of threats or actual force against other countries in order to safeguard what is perceived as its natural interests. Colloquially, it refers to excessive bias in judging one's own country as superior to others, an extreme type of nationalism.
After 9/11, 10 years on, the US went into war with Afghanistan, then Iraq, in order to protect its people and the world from new terrorist threats. But it seems, doesn't it, to have only achieved the opposite. What's your take?
Well, I mean, I would first start by saying, I mean, here in New York, I think all of us see the need to commemorate this anniversary. I mean, a terrible crime and a terrible tragedy took place 10 years ago. But I would dispute the sort of foundation of your question, which is America went to war first in Afghanistan and then in Iraq in order to protect the American people. I don't think there's any evidence of that.
So why did it go to war? Why did it go to war with them?
Well, look, let's start from what was the event itself on 9/11. You had hijacked planes, hit 2 buildings. 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabians. The man who was accused of plotting the attacks was a Saudi Arabian. The attacks were reportedly funded from Saudi Arabia. And immediately the attempt is made to invade Afghanistan, and Iraq is on the bill within weeks.
So why did people buy that then? Yeah.
Well, why? I mean, I think if one looks at this, you know, we're always told 9/11 changed everything, and certainly it is a changing point in American and world history. But I think if you look at what took place in the aftermath of 9/11, they don't flow from the events, they flow from policies that had been in the works for at least a previous decade. And go back, one could say, to the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the perception among a whole layer, and really what became the predominant layer of American foreign policy makers, that a unipolar moment had arisen. The United States could carry out its will by military force anywhere in the world, and it could use military force to reverse what had become more and more evidently an economic decline, a decline in its position on the world stage. So Afghanistan certainly was not a country which the CIA and the United States were unfamiliar. They carried out a war there, a covert war, against the Soviet-backed regimes in the 1980s. They had backed the Taliban, as a matter of fact, and Osama bin Laden was someone who was extremely well known to them. He was a CIA asset. Then you take Iraq. I mean, Saddam Hussein was an opponent of al-Qaeda. Yeah, they invented reasons to go into Iraq. They claimed he had relations with al-Qaeda, which now everyone admits was a lie. They claimed he had weapons of mass destruction, which now everyone knows was a lie. So what you're dealing with are wars not to protect the American people, but to serve the interests of the elite that run this country, the top 1%, the corporations, the banks that saw in wars of plunder the ability to get ever more wealth and to consolidate American grip on the oil resources of the world.
How come more people in your country aren't aware of this?
Well, I mean, I would say one of the great casualties of 9/11 and what followed is the integrity of the American media and what passed for an American intelligentsia. That really, they covered themselves in shame. They took not an objective policy towards anything, not a critical policy towards anything. They became the embedded ones, those who would cheer whatever military action was taken, the support our troops crowd, who were sending troops to a war that should never have been fought. And no critical voice was raised within the media. No critical voice was raised within the American two-party system. The fact that millions of people in this country did come to oppose these wars and overwhelmingly oppose them, overwhelmingly support the immediate withdrawal of troops from these countries, is a testament to the integrity of the American people, to working people who are hostile to war,
Bill,
who see it against their interests.
Is it fair to say, do you think that instead of uniting people, this tragedy, 9/11, brought about greater racism, greater discrimination, especially towards the Muslims and Islamic communities?
Well, no, of course it didn't. I mean, they stoked this deliberately. I mean, this was utilized, whatever they say, and of course they've changed their tone under
Hang on.
Obama.
When you say they, just clarify me, when you say they, who are you talking about?
I would say a ruling establishment in this country, which is composed, as I said, of the top layers of the financial system, of the corporate system, two political parties which they control, and a corporate-run media which does their bidding. And through that media, through the parties, through the instruments of public opinion that they control, they did foment nationalism, jingoism, the idea of revenge. Troops who went to Iraq were told you're getting your revenge for 9/11. They named all the camps in Iraq and Afghanistan after victims, firefighters, policemen who were killed at the World Trade Towers. I mean, there was an attempt to foment the idea of revenge against a people. Of course, no one ever raised why these people should oppose the United States. Why do they hate us? This came out of the clear blue sky, as they said.
All right.
And the media never said, well, maybe there are foreign policy questions that have created millions of people who see the United States not as a beacon of freedom, but as an oppressor.
Bill, thanks for giving us your views on the programme. Bill Van Auken, the member of the International Editorial Board of the World Socialist website, joining us on the line from New York. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
The school system is also participating in the jingoistic history of 9/11. Here's an example of what they'll be teaching the kindergarten through second graders. Why did the terrorists do this? The men who hijacked the planes wanted to kill many people and hurt the United States. Afterwards, they thought that the United States would become weaker and would lose some of its freedoms. They thought they would continue making attacks and eventually become more powerful than the United States. Even though the hijackers did hurt the United States, they were wrong about what happened after the attacks. Many people from New York, the United States, and the world came to help at the World Trade Center and to support the United States.
Now we have a video from Judge Napolitano from the 10th anniversary of 9/11.
Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? Is the loss of life on 9/11 a justification for the loss of freedom that the Bill of Rights have guaranteed? Tonight, life, liberty, and truth. Sunday is the 10th anniversary of 9/11. 1 decade later, Americans are still struggling to understand exactly what happened. What will we remember, and what will future generations come to believe about 9/11? Will it be the loss of life on that day, or will it be the even greater loss of life in the global conflicts that directly ensued? Will it be the short-term security precautions, such as the orders to shoot down any planes carrying innocent civilians, or will it be the lingering destruction of our rights to privacy from unlawful government surveillance, the institutionalization of government torture, and the government-generated semi-nudity and near-sexual assaults at our airports? Will future generations ever know the full truth about the events that led to 9/11? Or will they accept the government account of what happened, an account that the CIA's own bin Laden unit chief Michael Scheuer calls, quote, a whitewash from top to bottom? In the years preceding 9/11, Osama bin Laden was a young freedom fighter who promised American officials he'd help them to oust the Soviets from Afghanistan. Following the defeat of the Soviets and the fall of the Berlin Wall, capitalism was triumphant and communism was gone. But in 1991, when the United States invaded Iraq for the first time, we established military bases in a land revered by Islam. Furious at the American government for desecrating their lands, bin Laden and his maniacal associates began plans that would lead to the clash of civilizations that culminated in the tragic events of 9/11. But the signs of trouble were apparent after the bombings of the American embassies in Africa and the initial bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. It has now become increasingly clear that the Clinton administration should have done something. Michael Scheuer claims that bin Laden was identified as the mastermind of those attacks and was targeted multiple times and could have been captured and tried for these assaults. But President Clinton himself said no. Last year, retired Army Colonel Anthony Schaefer, a career intelligence officer, wrote a book entitled Operation Dark Heart, in which he shows that during his time serving on the secret Able Danger Project, he and his colleagues identified Mohammed Atta, the key 9/11 hijacker involved in the planes that struck the towers, a year before he struck, and they found him here in America. Although Colonel Schaefer brought this to the attention of the 9/11 Commission and was told he would testify, he was eventually turned away, and none of this intelligence was given to the American people. It was literally the politicians covering for each other because they failed to protect us. Question: how many government agents and bureaucrats have been fired for being asleep at the switch on 9/11? Answer: none. How many persons have been prosecuted for failing to do their duty in the years preceding 9/11? Answer: none. How many persons have been tried for committing the attacks on 9/11? Answer: none. Why is the government afraid of the truth? In the days after 9/11, while the country wept and the war hawks screamed for blood, one quiet voice rang out from the despair and offered a simple solution to solve our problems in a manner set forth in the Constitution. Texas Congressman Ron Paul offered legislation to authorize the president to send paid assassins to capture or kill bin Laden and his cohorts. It would have cost just a few $100,000 instead of the $2 trillion that Presidents Bush and Obama have borrowed and spent on our wars in the Middle East. But that voice was drowned out in the ocean of tears and cries for blood and occupation and regime change. The bill failed and the wars came and the blood flowed and the borrowing of cash couldn't come fast enough. Now here we stand, a decade after the attacks with thousands more dead and a bill for $2 trillion that needs to be paid. What have we learned, America? Do they truly hate us for our freedoms or for our presence in their lands? Have the terrorists won this war already by getting us to surrender our most basic rights in return for a false sense of security? Are the Constitution and our economy stronger now after this tragedy, or are they infinitely weaker? We will continue to ask all of this here on Freedom Watch. Freedom Watch has never forgotten the victims who were slaughtered and the heroes who died trying to save them. The firefighters and police who responded will forever be iconic of the bravery that was necessary to save those who could be saved. And God bless the troops. They don't belong there. When they leave, chaos will ensue. And though I profoundly reject their mission, I am in awe of the selfless men and women who have served their country honorably and well. One day, our descendants will know the answers to all of this. Will you?
Next, we have a video clip from the untold stories of the 9/11 families.
We were told that the FBI and the CIA were pretty much clueless about what was coming down the pike on September 11th, but on the day of September 11th, they knew it was bin Laden right away. They knew that there were 19 hijackers right away. They knew that it was Al-Qaeda right away. You know, I don't know how they so quickly, you know, after being so incredibly clueless, were able to just, you know, find all these dots and connect them.
Today, the FBI is releasing photographs of 19 individuals believed to be the hijackers aboard the 4 airliners that crashed on September 11th.
These are the faces of those who carried out the 4 attacks. And over the past week, the FBI have been trying to piece together how they lived, where, and with whom.
My first question was, I think immediately, where did they get the pictures of the hijackers that day, the following day after 9/11? I said that's fishy.
Within 48 hours of the attack, you have the FBI being able to name, photograph the 19 hijackers and know exactly who performed, you know, these atrocious attacks on the United States of America.
If the FBI works that quickly, I commend them, and I think that's wonderful. However, if you were able to get those 19 pictures up so rapidly, what the hell were you doing on September 10th? They had to be somewhere in your database. They had to cause concern somewhere if you got them that quickly. So where the hell were you in the weeks leading up to?
So we went to Director Mueller and we asked them, we had maybe 3 meetings.
Kristen, Lori, and as Peaceful Tomorrow's people, 2 of us went down there just on our initiative. Beverly was there. So there was approximately 10 people there.
And like most meetings that we had, they tended to get contentious because what you'd have is the agency heads saying they either had no answer, they didn't know, that was a rumor, every excuse but an answer.
And he spent most of the time talking about what they have done with their computers since. You know, more or less saying, well, it was a tremendous computer failure.
As far as the pent bomb investigation, you know, it was, they explained to us what the origin of the word pent bomb, I think, is investigation, and pent is Pentagon, and the Twin Towers is the 2 T's in the pent bomb. That took up some of the time.
So we had to sit and listen to that song and dance for about, like I say, a good solid hour. And then we started asking them questions.
I remember hearing reports of the hijackers that were listed on the FBI 19 were showing up, you know, in places alive.
Last week, the FBI, having gathered evidence, confidently issued the 19 names of those who had seized the 4 planes. Many of them were from Saudi Arabia. Now it appears that some people with those names are still alive. The FBI is working on the possibility that the hijackers used stolen identities. All of this complicates linking the attacks to Osama bin Laden.
Take the case of these 3 men. Is this really Abdulaziz Al-Umari, the man in the airport picture? Not according to one Arabic newspaper who says it's spoken to a Mr. Al-Umari in Saudi Arabia. Then there's Walid Al-Shahi, another man named as a hijacker, but whose father says now lives in Morocco. And finally, there's also doubt about Khalid Al-Midar. Officials are thought to be looking at the possibility the name may have been an alias.
We asked Director Mueller, what's going on here? We hear that some of these people are actually, you know, not who they were supposed to be. We're using aliases, we're using false identities. How can you continue to say that they were on the plane and that they're dead? Aren't you looking into what, you know, who really was responsible here?
How many of the 19 are you certain of? Can you say that you're certain of the identities, that they did not pick up false identities of any of the 19?
Well, I think we are fairly certain on a number of them.
And Serena, some interesting things about 9/11. One of the things, a lot of the facts, to me at least, they don't seem to add up. And one thing that's very creepy is the destruction of evidence. Like that first video was pointing out that the torture tapes disappeared, where they supposedly got all the evidence from the terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
The records disappeared.
Yep,
from
right in
like
the paper shredder.
yeah, from like WorldCom investigation. And another thing, it wasn't mentioned in this video, but the black boxes have never surfaced from the events. There's no audio recordings of what actually happened in the cockpit. So I have a lot of questions about 9/11, but do you have anything to add to that?
It just seems like this country is just further and further from making the country about freedoms. It's more about other people not liking our freedom, which we don't really have in the first place. So it's kind of more like, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, and in every single year it gets more and more like that because the young kids they taught in public school are growing up and they still are listening to them, you know. I think that a lot of stuff is just pushed away, like the idea of patriotism. It's kind of an excuse to push around people who are not following the ideas of the elite, which is creepy.
Yeah.
And then there are the people who have concerns about 9/11, and they're called conspiracy theorists, even though, you know, it is a conspiracy theory. People who are patriots tend to dismiss those conspiracy theorists because they don't love the country, even though the people in the country is what really matters in the first place, and not the almighty America being the almighty, unshaken, separate universe.
Yeah, even if you don't believe the conspiracy theories, it's sickening what has happened after 9/11, the loss of our rights, the wars in the Middle East. A lot of people don't realize, but America, our foreign policy, we've been involved in the Middle East since at least the 1950s. I mean, that's provable. We installed the Shah of Iran in the 1950s. We participated, we funded Iraq and Iran in the Iraq-Iran war. We funded Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan when the Soviets occupied it. And then, of course, Desert Storm, 1990s. And that was the reason that Osama bin Laden, his main reason for attacking us on 9/11 was the occupation of Saudi Arabia from the 1990s conflict.
That may be the case. I'm not sure because I'm not very much a believer of evidence that, or things that aren't fully evident to me. But I don't know about that exactly. But
yeah, you do agree though it's sickening, like the
yeah,
loss of rights.
it's totally messed up.
We now have to go through pat downs at the airport. If you open a bank account, you have to sign away your all of your financial information to the government.
Well, because they care.
They wiretap us. They've admitted to wiretapping us. I mean, now we have the National Defense Authorization Act, and they claim the authority to kill United States citizens. No court. You don't have a right to trial. Nothing.
Yeah, and there's also the fact that I remember when I was a kid, I was 12 years old when this happened, and I went to Waldorf, and we were all just sitting there singing in chorus class. And my friends who went to public school told me that, and this was middle school, you understand, they were saying, did you not hear about this stuff? I mean, it's all over our school building in every single classroom on every single television. You know, and I was like, your teachers will let you see something like that? That my teachers were a little too sensitive, I guess, or something. They wanted the parents to do it first, which I'm glad about that. So, but thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Join us again next week for another installment of ShireTV for more news and analysis. I'm James Cleveland.
And I'm Serena Beck. May you each find happiness, peace, and prosperity.